This picture is taken looking down a street. There happens to be a mirror right here. And so this is reflecting back this way, the scene of the street this way. And I saw the mirror and I put my camera to the eye and I took a few frames, and this guy walked by and I took the picture. I learned photography, or at least photographic technique, fairly early on from my father. My father was a semi-professional photographer. He was really a writer and a publisher and an editor, but when he was struggling with his writer's blocks, which were many, he sometimes did photography. So, I was about 10 when I first learned how to do work in the darkroom. But I have to say that I wasn't that intrigued by it then. I learned it, but I wasn't that excited. I didn't do it with the idea of it being a profession. It was simply a passion, an obsession. And I didn't major in college in photography. I majored in English literature, partially because I felt that I wanted to know more than just about photography. At the end of college, moved to New York to explore being a professional photographer. I was very fortunate in that after my sophomore year in college, I did take a workshop with Charles Harbut, who was then a member of Magnum. And Charles and I stayed in touch. And shortly before I graduated from college, he suggested I apply to Magnum. And I thought, well, no, this isn't appropriate. But he sort of insisted. And so I became a nominee photographer just before I graduated from college. So it was, very young. I think going to Haiti, opened up possibilities for me as a photographer that I hadn't really thought about before. I'd been very, very oriented towards photographing in the United States. The work I was doing was very much in that sort of stream of social landscape photography that was being done then. People like Lee Friedlander, Gary Winogrand, Charles Harbut. And going to Haiti sort of threw me off emotionally, in a good way. I mean, it startled, upset me, turned me upside down emotionally. And I began to realize that there were other kinds of worlds that I felt I needed to explore and discover. What I also realized, and this took place over a period of a few years, as I did that, and I was working then in black and white, I realized that something was missing. That the intense, searing light that exists in the tropics and the kind of brilliant colors that exist in a Haiti or a Mexico, I wasn't capturing those in black and white. I wasn't dealing with, on some level, the sensuality of some of these cultures. And so I began photographing in color in '78, '79 as a response to that, and basically have been working in color ever since. I mean, initially it was a response to working in certain kinds of places where there is vibrant color. Now I sort of work in color everywhere. I suppose the first prize I got was a World Press Award for my work on the U.S.-Mexico border that ran in Geo in 1979, something like that. I don't know, prizes aren't really something that concern me a lot. I mean, I'm happy to receive them, and I respect lots of people who award them and so forth. But ultimately for me, the reward is the process of photographing and discovering, and trying to really understand what it is and why it is that I'm photographing. It's not that I mean, a lot of it, it's very much of an exploration, an exploration of the world, and simultaneously an exploration of myself. I think if one thinks too much about the so-called rewards that one may or may not get from the world, you're inevitably going to be disappointed. There's always someone else who's going to do better than you. There's always some prize that's going to elude you, some grant that's going to elude you, some show that's going to elude you. I think the reward really has to come from the process of the work itself. I guess I've never really thought about whether prizes have changed the course of documentary photography. I really can't say. I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for others. For me, I mean, certain kinds of awards have changed me because they've very specifically been grants to be able to do things. In other words, getting a Guggenheim grant enabled me, with Rebecca, my wife and creative partner, to continue work in Cuba. Getting a Hasselblad Foundation award allowed me to further my work on the U.S.-Mexico border. Getting an NEA grant allowed me to complete my Florida book. But those were very specifically, you know, I received a certain monetary reward, and therefore I was able to work. That's for me what you know, these kinds of awards have been about. My pictures are about myself, but they're also about the world. I couldn't possibly take these photographs without the world. I'm utterly reliant on the world. You know, the world is my partner on some level. On the other hand, the pictures are very specifically my individual response to the world. Only I, or presumably I, respond exactly this particular way to the world. So, you know, it's a balance. I mean, different photographers are different. I think there are some photographers who are more inside themselves, and there are others who are sort of more specifically out there in the world. And I lie somewhere in between. I never would have started working, for instance, in color, I don't think, if I hadn't gone to Haiti and the US-Mexico border, places where color is somehow embedded in the culture. So it was the world that was telling me to do that. On the other hand, the way I've decided to work in color with this sort of intense, often intense primary colors and so forth, allowing shadows to go deep and dark, that's presumably more of an expression of who I am, as well as what's out there. It's a combination of the two. When I go on a photographic trip, I mean, first of all, I mean, it also depends a little bit on terms of the specifics. In other words, I do assignments for publications at times where there are certain specific things that I need to get for publications. But I think it's more interesting to talk about when I decide to go somewhere just for myself. First of all, going somewhere for the first time, it's an experiment. It's you know, and you know, if it ultimately comes to something, it's a journey, but it's a journey that I have no idea where the end will be. Usually what I do is I read in some guidebooks just to get the lay of the land. And then I'll read maybe a novel set in the place to get the feel of it. But I don't read too deeply in, you know, or too extensively in the history or the intellectual history of the place right at the beginning. I wait until I've at least made one trip, because I want my visual knowledge of a place to develop at the same rate as the intellectual knowledge. In other words, if I read extensively about the history of a place, and I have all these ideas about what this and what that in a place mean, I may try and push those, you know, I'll try and push those in terms of sort of symbols of what that place is. But that may not be what my initial visual reaction is. My initial visual reaction may be something else. So I want to be able to have that initial visual reaction without too much intellectual baggage weighing me down. So as I make more trips to the place, I read more, so that by the end of the project, my intellectual knowledge of the place corresponds to my visual knowledge. Now, because the film that I used for 30 years has disappeared, I've been forced to work digitally, but I used to take a couple cameras and a lot of film. Look, I have some ambivalent feelings about digital. You know, I dislike its intangibility. You know, I don't like the fact that I look at my desk and there are 6 hard drives and I can't touch the pictures. I also think that I used to like that process of going and photographing and not knowing what I had, that I liked the process of the mystery, and then going back, you know, several weeks later or whatever, and looking at the stuff and sort of reliving my experience and the process by looking at the pictures then. You know, digital, it's immediate. There are some good things about it. You know right away whether you have something. I think ultimately it's hard to decide in the moment, or even in the matter of a few days, whether you really have something. I mean, I think that, you know, in terms of editing, I think that time is a great help. You feel very differently about what you took the night after you took it, or 2 days later versus 3 months later when you really have some perspective, or 3 years later when you really have perspective. So, as I said, I have some ambivalence about digital, but I have sort of reluctantly embraced it because I just think I sort of have to move into the 21st century. And on top of that, the film that I used for 30 years doesn't exist anymore. So I would have to find another film. And who knows how long that film will be around for. I think the world is a complicated, mysterious place. And I think we, each of us have our individual points of view, but they're just our own individual points of view. And yeah, ultimately there's so much we don't know. And I'm intrigued by that, and I'm intrigued by that as a response to the world. I mean, in terms of complication, I'm intrigued how this, and this can all coexist. Not just that this exists, but that all these other things exist with it. That intrigues me and excites me, and I think often my photographs are a kind of embrace of that. It's a way of working that's evolved over the years. I think if you look at my early black and white from the late 70s, you will definitely see the roots of the color. You'll see much of the same kind of complexity. Not as great complexity visually, but some of it. I think if you look at different bodies of my work, you'll see it in different ways. I would say that, generally speaking, my Istanbul work is probably the most complex work, the most layered. But that's also, a reflection of Istanbul itself, which is a incredibly multi-layered city with all these different things going on simultaneously, as well as all these different layers of culture piled on top. Usually it's more a feeling, and I think Cartier-Bresson said this, but you sort of smell the possibility of a picture. You go somewhere and you feel, something's interesting here, and maybe it's this over here that's interesting you, and you sort of hang out a little bit, and then this starts to happen over here, and this starts to happen over here. But usually the most exciting pictures are the ones where this over here happens that you didn't think possibly could happen, or just came out of the blue totally unexpectedly. That's when I really get tremendous excitement as a photographer, when something happens in some way that's utterly unexpected. It's when the world surprises me and I'm able to capture it in some way. I like series, but I like single iconic images in the series. And it depends a little bit on the nature of the project too. The way I photograph has to do with who I am, the way I see. And for instance, with my work in Haiti, I think it's interesting that Haiti can simultaneously be a horrific and tragic society and yet have this kind of sense of vibrancy and life to it that is very, very unique. And I think my photographs are a response to that. And personally, from my perspective, if I just showed the horror of Haiti, I'm not sure I'd be doing a service to Haiti, in my opinion. I'm not saying in other people, in my opinion. Likewise, if I just took beautiful pictures of beaches in Haiti, I don't think it would be at all appropriate either. So, I mean, I'm trying to look at what I perceive as the full complexity of a place or a situation, the full complexity of the world. And the world is a complicated place with many different, often contradictory or paradoxical elements to it. And I try and embrace that. I'm not interested in sort of saying, oh, this is this way, and I'm only going to photograph it that way. I want to photograph it this way and this way and this way simultaneously. I edit myself, but also partway through the editing process, I bring Rebecca, my creative partner, in to look at the stuff. And vice versa, the same thing happens when she does her work. I take a look at it as well. But the rule in the house is that the creator always has the last say. So, if I like a picture and she doesn't, I keep it. But I think about the fact that she didn't like it, and maybe a month later I may realize she's right. You never know. But no, I'm a big believer in photographers having a big hand in the editing of their work, because I really feel that if you can't edit your work, you're not really expressing yourself. If someone else totally outside is editing, that's really an expression of them as much as you. It's part of the process of understanding what it is you're doing, you know? I mean, you go out there and you respond spontaneously to the world with a camera. And you know, you don't always know exactly what you're getting or what you're doing. You're sort of wandering and going in here and going, you think you might have a picture here, you might have a picture there. But then when you get it back and you start editing it, all of a sudden you start making relationships between pictures. All of a sudden the pictures start to talk to you on some level. I mean, Rebecca likes to say that her pictures are smarter than she is, and I agree that my pictures are smarter than I am. You know, they tell me things that I may not perceive when I'm out there photographing. And so the process of editing can be a process of education. You're discovering what it is that you're doing. I mean, I know one photographer who says, well, when you understand what you're doing, then the project's done. I mean, I think that's an exaggeration, but a little bit of that, there's a little bit of truth to it. I mean, I feel like, you know, the initial trips to a place are exploratory trips. You're feeling it out, you're figuring out what you're doing. You edit the stuff, you look at it, you begin to make relationships between pictures. All of a sudden things become clear about what it is you're doing. As you edit, you go back and you do more. Maybe 3/4 of the way through the book or the project, you realize, oh yes, I need to get X. But most of the time it's this process of sort of photographing, editing, and feeling out what it is that you're really doing. I can't give any kind of definition of what makes a good picture. One thing is that a picture that potentially excites me is one that takes me somewhere I haven't been before. I don't mean physically, I mean sort of emotionally or psychologically. It might be in terms of something surprising about a subject, but it might also be just simply about the way the photographer perceived it. But it's something that I haven't seen before on some level. Most fashion photography, I suppose, is, you know, providing a service to a set of clients, just like advertising photography is. And you know, I think that there is exceptional work that's done in fashion photography where you feel that there is some other element that has to do with the way the photographer perceives the world, that makes it different, that ends up having some kind of psychological dimension. I mean, if I think of, say, or Deborah Turbeville's work, I think that work does something else. You know, it goes somewhere else, and that intrigues me. But I think lots of fashion photography is simply functional. It's providing something, it's solving a problem for a client, and that's fine. But it's not what I want to do. But basically, from here over is all a mirror in the barbershop. But then, of course, the mirror is reflecting another mirror, which is showing someone walking by out there. So, because you can see, all the writing there is backwards. I hung out at the barbershop for a while. I saw, again, I smelled the possibility of a picture. I saw this mirror, I saw the guys hanging around. I took lots of different kinds of pictures in the barbershop, but I kept sort of returning to this scene, to this direction. So there are other pictures with other configurations of people, but this is the one where she's there, that person's there, and there was a guy there.